D. McClung, Archer Monologues. I don't know about you, but I know about me. And I understand things a little better than most people. That could be just my opinion. But observing people, as I do, reading their comments on the internet, Facebook and Google Plus and so on, reading their comments, I get a gist of where they're coming from. It's like if somebody says something, let's say in a comment on Facebook, and they make a comment in response to a meme or a post that someone else has put up, and their comment is full of mistakes, full of errors, errors of fact, errors of logic. And yes, errors in the words that they use and how they put together their sentence. They express themselves with words, and they say stuff. And when they do so, and I read it, and I can see that they have, shall we say, a deficiency in using the English language. They use words that don't mean what they think they mean. They misuse words and abuse words. That's what I'm saying. And they lack imagination, for the most part. Unless you want to consider their opinions to be totally imaginative, as opposed to real, logical, rational, sane. But at any rate, the point is, I can get the gist of where they're coming from. I can kind of analyze what they say and figure out what it is they meant to say or what they thought they were saying. I can gather their emotional state in regard to whatever the particular subject matter might be that they're responding to. And it gives me insight. And I have the, shall we say, the gift of insight. I can look into things and see things that the normal person just doesn't see. That probably comes from the fact that I'm an artist. And I'm a dedicated artist, by the way. I mean, art is priority. The subject matter of art, my art, involves everything. Because I believe that art is I've said this many years ago, decades ago, on television even. I was interviewed by a local television station, and they asked me a question, and I answered it. And it was pretty much spur of the moment. I kind of had to ad lib and to think fast because they asked me the question, and I had never heard the question before. I hadn't just never given it any consideration. At that moment anyway, I wasn't even thinking about that question, and it just came out of the blue and hit me in the face, and I had to respond because, hey, microphone in my face, camera capturing me there on the sidewalk in front of the courthouse in Marion County, as I recall. And the question was presented, and I had to answer. And I did. And my answer made it to the news. I'm thinking, and this was before internet and Facebook and all that. It was you had a newspaper, you had a television station, and if you didn't see the show on Channel 12 at 6 o'clock or 11 o'clock at night, you just didn't hear it because there was no text, there was no online recorded news show called WDTV or WBOY. It's you said it, and you either watched the show that evening and saw it, or you didn't. No repeats, no replays, no YouTube to go to and watch it again and again and over and over. I was young, but even then I had insight. I had the capacity to reason. And I'm not 100% happy with my statement and my response to her question. But I said it, and I stand behind it, and even to today, I do stand behind that statement. I could have said a whole lot more, but it was a snippet. It was a, what do they call it, the news flash, one of those, they ask a question, you answer the question, and they edit and cut and leave it out of the news broadcast entirely or whatever. In this case, it was included, and they didn't mess up what I said. They didn't cut it. They didn't edit it. They just played it as I said it, and it came off fairly well. Now, bear in mind, back then I was a little bit camera shy. I'd never been on television before. I hardly ever went out and presented myself to a large group of people, or even a small group of people. Made me nervous. Didn't really know what to say. And sometimes I get a little, just freeze up and not know what to say at all in certain situations. But anyway, in that case, someone asked me a question, I answered it. It made it on the news and so on. Now, can't remember if it was the TV or the newspaper. It seems to me like I read it in a newspaper. Like I said, it's decades ago. I can't remember exactly. But anyway, what I said was, and I can't even remember the exact wording of the question, but I do remember the answer. Fairly word for word, maybe not exactly. But here was my response to her question. But I'm not going to tell you the question because I can't word it accurately. I don't remember exactly how she worded it. It could have been simply, what's your opinion on art, or what have you. And I suppose there was a reason for her asking. It was in front of the courthouse, so could have been during one of those street fairs that we had back in those days, where the artists set up their little displays in front of the stores on the main street of Fairmont. Could have been during that time. In fact, now that I think about it, I think it may be exactly when it was. Anyway, my response was this. Paraphrasing myself because I don't remember exactly the exact words I used. Art is the backbone of society. Now, I would elaborate on that today, and I would word it a little bit differently, and I don't know if I would word it differently in that simple statement, but I would elaborate and I would expound upon the concept a little bit in response to her question of what art is, how I feel about art, or what I think the purpose of art is, etc., etc. Because I'm more wordy now than I was then, and I could write probably several pages on that subject. But what I meant was, in regards to that response, was that art is the backbone of society. Now, there may be those who would disagree with that, and there are those who might offer up something else. or define art in a different fashion, and so on. I've heard people say this since forever. Art is in the eye, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, which, of course, is a simplistic response that hardly qualifies as expertise or even accurate, because probably not. All right. I won't get into that one. That's a different question. But I believe that art throughout the history of humanity has played a very significant part, a skeletal part of any society. And I won't say that it was true back in caveman days or the time when human beings were like living in the trees, if they ever did. It's funny because sometimes, in school, it was like, as I recall, people lived in caves. They were called cavemen, and so on. Like, maybe, and maybe not. I don't recall any concrete evidence to support that theory. But take it as it is. Just take it for face value and say, yeah, sure. And then maybe humans lived in trees. Could be. That's not the dispute here, and that's not my concern. Whether or not human beings ever climbed and swung from tree limbs is not really important at this point with what I'm talking about. That'll be a different branch of science, I believe. All right. But I do believe that without art, human existence would be lacking in any luster. And it would be a great deal of history would have been lost if it hadn't been for somebody painting a picture of a scene that occurred in, say, 1775. Or older times, like the Egyptians and so on, with their inscriptions on sculptures and so forth, and buildings and so on. Didn't have a camera, didn't have a recording machine. Just the only way you could record a historical event was to either write it down and describe it in words, or paint a painting of it. And of course, that's one frame. A painting being one frame in the event, and the rest of the event, in regards to expressing or recording that, is lost. Hopefully, people from those olden days, before cell phones and Instagrams and Facebook and radio, television, and so on, that hopefully those people recorded events accurately. And science does help us determine if that was accurate or not. So my point is that society is, to some degree, influenced by, directed by, swept along in a certain direction. History is recorded through art. Human behavior, human condition has been recorded and, say, captured by cameras and by artists who drew and who painted and who wrote down things and described things and events. Without that, and I do consider art to be a very diverse field, like painting, drawing, sculpting, writing fiction, writing nonfiction is an art form to me. Just as the human form, the human body is a warm sculpture, in my view. And that's how I see people, generally, in my art, in my work. But I also try to capture the persona of the individuals that I express on and observe during their existence and lives as elements of the human condition. big on the human condition thing. And I make expressions depicting my observations, that is to say, my critical analytic observations of human existence and humankind and human behaviors and so on. What we're seeing today in America, for example, is it's a little bit scary because we're not sure exactly what kind of hell is about to be reaped upon us. We could have some confidence that it's going to be all right, but still, we're not sure. And I think most Americans are a little bit not knowing about what's going to happen. And predictions have been made by laymen as well as professional people. And as far as the conclusions are concerned, we're just going to have to wait and see what happens. However, recording history and human events and being imaginative and creative and coming up with, shall we say, a fantasy look at humanity. Today we have science fiction, and we have other sorts of genre, movies, for example, and books and so forth like that. So, which is a good thing. It's a good thing. Diversity is always good. Unless you're trying to pull a whole country together to do a certain thing, in which case you have to resort to a little artistic thing called propaganda and manipulation and so on. Furthering the agenda, as it were. Well, I have an agenda. I prefer not to call it that because I like to think that agenda is, when I hear the word agenda, I think somebody's up to something no good. So I kind of avoid using the word agenda when talking about my own goals, my own observations and conclusions about the human system and how it's heading, where it's heading, what's going on. Speculation at any rate. Based on the best facts we can find. And using the best brain power that we can muster. I think humanity at this point in time would not be where we are today if it wasn't for art in one form or another. And in this case, I'm thinking about like cell phones and high definition televisions and computers and notebooks and so on. That's all creative stuff. Somebody created that. They invented it, they created it, they were applying the principles of art to their endeavors. So art made the rounded corners on a kitchen range, for example, and I know the man who did that, or at least worked on that many years ago. M.K. Garner was his name. One of my earlier acquaintances with real artists, and he was one. Yeah, although he called himself just a painter, but he was an artist. So the thing is here, I look at art today, and if someone was to ask me the same question that she asked me back then, and I'm assuming that this question is understandable and is similar, and I would answer, art is life with a passion. I'm not dismissing the first quote, the first thing I said, that art is the backbone of society. And I imagine there are people who would say art is the genitals of humanity, which may be true. It's also a mirror on society. And art copying life or life copying art, that sort of thing. So at any rate, I think that art is a very important element in human existence. We know things today from the past as a result of art, of those people back then. And we also record history today with our art, whether it be the written word, fiction, non-fiction, whether it be sculpture or an installation or an abstract or a cubistic or a hard-edged expressionist, which is what I do a good deal of, always have. I'm very fond of the hard-edge expressionism style of painting, for example. I'm also a minimalist, and sometimes my work is minimal in detail, but very rich in aesthetic value. And yes, I think what I do is very good. The thing here is, when it comes to people, they express their opinions, and I've heard this recently too. Equal. There's a misconception in that concept, because equal under the law simply means the government must treat us all equally and freely. I mean, we government cannot discriminate against someone because of their race or their color of their skin, and that may be two different things to some people, because of their beliefs, whatever those beliefs may be entail. The bottom line there is equal under the law applies, and I'm pretty sure that's a part of the principles of freedom that this country exists under, though not very often obeyed by the government. But the concept of equal has been maligned. It has been totally screwed up, so to speak, because now people say equal, but they don't mention under the law, because that's not what they want. They think that that everybody should be equal by law. They think the government should create a law making us all equal. And I'd say it, but it's not the way reality works. So anyway, I'm talking about equal in a sense of, the definition of equal in the minds of some people could be described as lowering us all to the lowest common denominator, which is, I repeat, the lowest common denominator. In other words, reduce us all to equally brain dead, or equally poor, or equally enslaved by the Nazi fascist police state. The statists, as one organization calls it. So, equal isn't exactly a good thing. And for one thing, if I'm equal to you and I happen to be a genius, then that would mean you should be a genius too, to make that statement valid. If your IQ is equal to mine, then it's up there around 140. And I'm sorry, but if that's true, fine. But if it's not true, then you're not equal to me in the area of intellect. Now, normally I would take the opportunity to brag about myself a little bit, toot my own horn, because, after all, who else was going to do it? Which would make me a narcissist in your eyes, and so on. And then I would have to say, so what's wrong with that? And so on. So what I'm trying to say here is, what I did say and what I will continue to say is that equal under the law is valid, and that's the way it should be. The government should treat us all equally. There shouldn't be no discrimination against individuals or groups of individuals within American society. For example, those under 21 are not allowed to consume alcoholic beverages, and that's just discrimination. There are actually laws saying that even though you're 18 and a legal adult with all the privileges and rights granted to you thereon by the existence of the government, yeah, there's a problem there, but we won't get into that. However, but the government discriminates by making laws, making it a crime to, consume alcohol between the ages of 18 and 21, even though you're a legal adult, just like anyone over 21. Because equal means you're equal to other people. And equal, like a 17-year-old is equal to a 20-year-old is equal to a 30-year-old. Or in my case, a 69-and-a-half-year-old. And that's not true. That's not even possible. It just physically, it just practically just cannot be. I know there are a lot of people that actually are common and mediocre in the field of, let's say, a certain group that may just simply be sheep and blindly follow the dictates of the tyrant and the bully called their government. And some of them even love their government, which is, I think we could describe that as the Stockholm Syndrome. Sort of like love your enemy or love your captor or love your master if you're a slave. So, equal under the law is a good principle, and the government should obey that and honor that and respect that. And if they don't, then they've committed a crime. Because the Constitution, for example, and other aspects of the elements of principles of freedom dictate, in a good way, that you can't discriminate against people, government, however. And there are others. There is Title 18 of the U.S. Code that totally discriminates against people under 18, which is forbidden in a free country, and yet there is Title 18 with all of its evil intact. And is being enforced by the Gestapo, Stasi, Nazi police state bastards called cops and other judicial people, elements, judges, prosecutors, cops. I'm not going to say a law enforcement because that's a Nazi Taliban word, which would describe the Gestapo and the Stasi if I was applying those two words to the American police state and the coppers who are running around committing police duties and so on, and yet getting it wrong and committing crimes against humanity in the process. I suppose normally when people hear the phrase crimes against humanity, they're thinking of somebody like a dictator in some African country, slaughtering tens of thousands of people. Not personally, but, with his army and police departments and so on. His hired hitman, as it were. Whereas when I say that, I'm not speaking of those people only, but I'm speaking of everyone in general. So, equal under the law is valid, and it holds water, and it should be the case. And the government is not allowed by law to discriminate against, say, 18, 19, and 20-year-olds when it comes to the drinking age, so to speak. By the way, nature knows nothing about ages except that you get older and older and then you die, kind of a thing. And you go through stages of life and maturity and development. It's like infant, child, pubescent enters into adolescence, which is no longer a child. And we can't really put an age on that because people develop and evolve in their physical maturity in different times, different ways, actually. Children transcend into adolescence through the process of puberty, and girls get boobs, and men and hair around their vagina. And the vagina gets woken up to the sensations of being touched and played with and pumped and stuff. However, we find, according to my observations and what I've studied, is that girls are becoming more mature and entering into puberty at earlier stages, as opposed to 12 or 13, as opposed to 11 or 12, as opposed to 9 or 10. I mean, there's some evidence that girls are entering puberty as early as 8. And I don't know why that is. I don't have any research data to fall back on here, but I've heard it said, and I have seen 9 and 10-year-old girls with breasts, small ones, to be sure, but they were there, and they're not just flat little nothings that, like a boy. I mean, after all, before a girl reaches that point where she becomes pubescent, she pretty much has the physique of a boy. Her breasts don't exist, and all she's got is nipples, just like boys do. And it's hard to tell sometimes if you see a 6-year-old or 8-year-old boy and girl side by side, nude, or at least shirtless, and you probably can tell the difference between the two, and except for the superficial things like longer hair. Of course, now long hair is good for anybody. The facial expressions of the facial features might be just a little bit more feminine than for a boy. But I've seen boys that look like girls, and I've seen girls that remind me of boys, and they have no breasts, they have no tits. I know tits is a crude word, but it's a valid word. And it's a whole lot more fun than breasts, even though I like the word breasts as well. It's just harder to say. You see, nature doesn't, there's no nature's law book that says, you're 18, you're an adult now. Or you're 13 and now you're an adolescent. Or that you're 9 and you're still a child, because of the varieties of scheduled or maturing process. I've seen 11-year-old girls that looked very much like older, 17, even 18. I've seen 15-year-old girls look like 20-year-old women. And I've seen the same in boys, in adolescents and young men. So, seeing as how the principle here in America, at least, is that you're created equal, in the sense of you're created with a balanced, shall we say, biological agenda. You will grow, mature, you'll get teeth, you'll get your sexual hormones will become active, and for girls you'll get your menstrual cycle. Boys, you'll get what you get. You'll start spitting sperm out of your pecker when you play with it, as opposed to when you were 6 and you played with it and you didn't ejaculate. I remember my time when I was 9 and 10 years old. I remember very well how that went. Not to say that I was normal or that I was not normal during that time, sexually speaking. But legally speaking, lost that thought. Do that from time to time. Must be the fluoride in the water. But considering that the law forbids the government from discriminating against people based on their age, societies, on the other hand, can be discriminating. And I'm not going to get into the whole discrimination and racism and all that kind of thing. But you don't have the same impact with the human interaction, rules of interaction, and the rules of nature, and being social creatures as humans are. You don't have the same impact with, we're equal. as we would under the knowledge and realization that the government cannot discriminate based on equal in the eyes of the law. So obviously, laws forbidding or banning or punishing people for consuming alcohol at the age of 18, 19, or 20 are illegal and invalid laws, since you can't call that equal. Say the right to drink alcoholic beverages. I did say right to drink alcoholic beverages. It's not a privilege. The right to drink it or own it, there are laws opposed to the nature of things, because nature says, hey, you're perfectly capable of drinking a glass of wine at the age of 12 and 17 and 19. If it's available and you want it, there it is. The laws of man doesn't change that fact. It's a biological possibility. What I'm getting at here is the government is not allowed to discriminate against an individual or group of individuals based on age or anything else for that matter. So the anti-freedom, anti-human right burden placed upon 18, 19, 20-year-old people is illegal, unfair, and just totally contrary to the laws of nature. Nature trumps man's law, because you can't change nature, but you can change man's law. And should change it, because many times it's not a good law. Like Title 18 of the U.S. Code, which is absolute, pure evil. And those who voted for it should be executed, or at the very least removed from office and put in a mental institution, because they're criminally insane. Tyrants, bullies, and assholes. And that's my opinion. The asshole part is my opinion. The rest of it is a fact, based on critical, analytic observations and logical, calculated conclusions. So you can't discriminate. So those, by making a law that says, everyone under 18 is a child, is absurd, because that's not what the word child means. We've redefined the word and turned it into babble. Now it means nothing, because they say it means a minor, someone under 18. All of these are fabricated laws, and all these are fabricated notions. Fabricated and arbitrary numbers do not enter into the picture, because Mother Nature, or the laws of nature, will say, you're not a child anymore. You're now an adolescent. And now you're an adult. I find I have a little fun with the word adolescent by just simply pronouncing it adult-lescent, meaning a little less than an adult, or less than a full-grown adult, or developed adult. And it boggles my mind why the American people don't see this, all of this stuff that I've said in the last 38 minutes. It's just obvious, and it's just rational, logical, common sense is what it should be. It is common sense. I did hear read a study one time that said only 7% of the American people have common sense, meaning 93% of them are stupid. But it's ironic that common sense is only 7% of the American people have common sense. What is that? Like an oxymoron or something? 97% of the American people don't have common sense. So you can't really call it that common, can you? Since common would indicate that a majority of people, in this case Americans, would have common sense. And apparently they don't. All right, I'm going to wrap this up here in a couple of minutes. As I've said before, my name is Dee McClung. This is Archer Monologues, and I'll leave you on this thought. If I can formulate the thought in my head correctly, I'll let it come out of my mouth as sounds and words put in a row between a capital letter and a period. Sentence, otherwise known. Discrimination is against the law in America for the government to do it. As for human beings, discriminating against other human beings, like racists and so on, it's not necessarily a crime. You can discriminate against people. You can not like people. You have the right not to like certain people. You have the right to not like them for whatever reason you see fit. Government has no say in that matter. Doesn't make it nice. Doesn't make it right. Probably makes you an asshole if you hate people because they have a color of their skin. Not a good thing. But the government is not going to legislate that. The government might present some guidelines, but bottom line is, can't discriminate against us because of our age, for example. And that's exactly what the government does. Like the age of consent laws, which is total fabricated nonsense, because nature provides that law. You don't need it written down in the law books of a country. It's common sense. Everybody has the same rights because that's the principle, wasn't it? Wasn't that what it said in the that important document we talk about from time to time? All men are created equal, meaning all mankind are created equal under the law. And I guess you could say, if you wanted to do it, you could say that everyone is born into the world equal in some sense. Like, I don't know, have the same opportunities to evolve and mature as a person and become a child, become a prepubescent, a pubescent, and an adolescent, and an adult. Left to nature, that is exactly what would happen, unless you die from disease or whatever, violence. You evolve into a grown-up, and at various stages. And I've seen teenagers that are quite mature and quite intelligent and quite considerably more equal than adults in some cases. For example, my parents were not equal to me, and I certainly wasn't equal to them. And in a sense, that's not a bad thing. But clearly, some children are smarter than their parents, so they're not equal to their parents. Their parents are not equal to them, because the parents have IQs of 100 or less, whereas the offspring, by some miraculous natural act, were born and grew into geniuses, or genius eyes, I like to say. All right, so I'm going to go end this session because I've got things to do and I'm running out of time. So consider what I've said just now, and check out my other shows, my other podcasts on Spreaker.com, Dean McClung's Art Monologues, and think about it. And if you want to make a comment, there's a place you can do that. There's a way. If you want to send me hate mail, though, just don't. I get enough as it is. All right, I'll be talking to you later, and this show will be posted as soon as possible. Not right now, because I'm a little bit behind in posting. I've got several shows to post. All right, I'll talk to you later, maybe tomorrow. Take care.